name's Hallie Harker,
And I'm Tyler Kohler.
and we're going to be touching on the idea of intercollegiate athletics with the emphasis on Division I athletes, whether we should pay them.
Or not to pay them.
Who really knows?
So today we're going to talk about the history of intercollegiate athletics, the establishment of the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the pay-to-play initiative, the current status of student athletes in compensation, which is non-payment, and I'm going to argue why student athletes should be paid. We're going to look at some opinions on the topic from student athletes themselves here at Arizona State University, and then look at some future trends. So the history behind intercollegiate athletics really started in the early 1800s when Yale established the first rowing crew in 1843, and then Harvard right after in 1844. Then in 1852, there was the first unofficial regatta competition, which is just a rowing competition, but it was between Yale and Harvard at Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire. Then in 1858, there was the establishment of the College Rowing Association. In 1859, there was the first intercollegiate official competition, rowing competition between Yale and Harvard. There was the formation of the Baseball Society at Princeton, and then also the first intercollegiate baseball game took place between Amherst and Williams. Then in 1869, the first intercollegiate football game took place between Rutgers and New Jersey, which is now known as Princeton. Columbia established the first intercollegiate track meet. And then in 1873, the first intercollegiate track meet took place between Cornell, Amherst, and McGill in Canada. And there was only one event held, and that was a 2-mile race. And then in 1875, intercollegiate athletics became heavily popular. There was the establishment of Intercollegiate Association of Amateur Athletes of America, and then the Intercollegiate Football Association. Then in 1879, the Intercollegiate Baseball League was established. Intercollegiate athletic regulation really was a transfer from student control to faculty supervision. There was a rising concern, especially in intercollegiate football. In 1905, there was 18 deaths and over 100 major injuries. So President Roosevelt held a conference at the White House to help review the major rules of football, and a lot of the major football programs at the time attended. But unfortunately, after the conference, there was still a lot of death and major injuries still occurring. So Chancellor Henry McCracken decided of New York University to establish his own rule committee, and these two forces joined together to establish the Intercollegiate Athletics Association with 62 original members, and that they renamed it in 1910 to the National Collegiate Athletic Association, as known today as the NCAA. Compensation of athletes really was from the beginning in the 1800s. Athletes did get financial incentives, and it depended on the school that they went to. One of the examples I'm going to talk about today is James Hogan, who was a prominent football star at Yale in the early 1900s. Some of the compensation benefits he received was a free suite, rooms in the dorm, free meals at the university clubhouse, a $100 scholarship, but doesn't seem like a lot now, but in 1905 that was a lot of money. The profits from sales of the program, he had a contract with the American Tobacco Company where he received commissions on cigarette sales in New Haven, and also had a 10-day paid vacation to Cuba. And then when the NCAA was formed, there was principles and practices established in 1938 with more of a needs-based compensation for student athletes, and then the Sanity Code, which followed in 1948, which really honed in on the needs-based and really formulated to the fees and tuition part of compensation, and student athletes needed to be admitted to the university in order to receive any financial aid help. But this, unfortunately, was hard to enforce and failed when there was not a 2/3 majority vote to ban students who violated this code. And then athletic scholarships made their way in the 1950s. It was implemented to remove the need for alumni donations, and because all the money was coming from the university itself, and they were all athletic-based scholarships. And also, even if the athlete decided to leave the sport, they still received their athletic scholarship. And then athletic scholarships were officially amended in 1956 to cover all commonly expenses in higher education. And then between the 1950s and no limit on the number of athletic scholarships that the university could hand out.
Fast forward a few years, about 20 years, we're going to look at into 2003, and this is whenever the whole initiative of pay to play came about, and that was their slogan. And the Nebraska head football coach, he made a big push for his student athletes. He was the first Division I A school to make this push for student athletes to be paid. He proposed this bill and he set it out for Senator Chambers, who actually did help push the bill and the initiative as well. And basically he quoted here, "Why limit student athletes' financial support if the school is willing to pay for it?" So if the schools have the funds and they have the monetary possession, then why wouldn't the student athletes be allowed to be paid? And then they proposed the Student Athletes Bill of Rights, and that's basically this bill that's saying that student athletes should be able to be paid and they have rights to these certain things. And then the NCAA president, Miles Brandt, he stepped in with an argument saying that it's not a good idea at all because there are already Pell Grants proposed for these student athletes on top of the scholarship that they already have. And that's whenever the NCAA proposal passed, basically saying that no, the NCAA is not going to allow student athletes to be paid to play. So in 2008, student athletes actually accused the NCAA of not giving them the certain amount of scholarship money that they deserve. So according to the cost of attendance per institution that you go to, that's the type of coverage that the student athlete should have. So they shouldn't have to be covering the cost of attendance. The NCAA or the funds of the scholarship should be covering that. So in 2008, they accused the NCAA of keeping the scholarships beneath the actual cost of attendance. And then under the settlement, the NCAA actually gave $10 million to each institution, basically proving to them that no, we weren't keeping money from you, you just weren't receiving the proper type of money because your institution couldn't afford it. And then 2012, the NCAA board allowed scholarship students to receive $2,000 extra per year. So each each year students were allowed to receive $2,000 extra on top of their scholarship that they were already receiving. Which is kind of funny, students actually weren't seeing that money. The cost of attendance just went up for institutions, therefore that money was just going to cover the cost of attendance. So in reality, the students weren't really being paid to play, but it just showed that the NCAA was taking this initiative that no, we are gonna pay you, but it was kind of sneaky on their part. And then in 2015, the student athletes were actually allowed to be paid as an Olympian. So let's say that an international student or a USA American went and played and competed for their sport in the Olympics, they were actually allowed to receive monetary possession for their competition, which prior to 2015, they were not allowed to receive that type of benefit. Okay, so I actually was a former athlete here at Arizona State, and I am arguing what the present status is right now, which is not paying student athletes, and I truly believe that this should be the case now. The first argument that I have is that education is money. Student athletes don't recognize the cost of a true education. And you can ask anyone around on campus how much it costs to go to school. And they don't recognize exactly, Tyler's nodding his head yes. They don't recognize the value that an education has and a bachelor's degree has in the real world after their competition is all over. And they have to recognize that there's going to be an increase on NCAA oversight and rules and regulations. Every student athlete knows that whenever you go and compete, the NCAA is watching every single one of your moves. And if there was pay on top of this, there was no way a student athlete would be able to breathe, let alone just enjoy their life as a student athlete. The next thing is that the athletic department has its role and purpose. So basically, how much are the student athletes going to get paid? Is it going to be based off of their performance? What if men's programs are being paid more than women's programs? Isn't this a Title IX issue? So basically it just comes down to the athletic department has its role, and they're going to have to play that role. They're going to have to step in, and they're going to have to be the ones to decide on a per institution basis of where the heck is this money going to go? How much is each athlete going to get paid? And that's not going to work. Next one, it just becomes a professional atmosphere, and it just loses the intent and it loses the atmosphere of what college athletics brings. Everyone knows that the professional level has not a lot of competition and not a lot of fan engagement as much as it used to, just because this college level, they're competing because they love the sport, whereas once it becomes professional, it becomes your job. And then the last one, I had already touched on this, is only scholarship students get paid or what? So let's say that on a volleyball team, there's 13 scholarships allowed, but there's still 7 other girls that are walk-ons that still contribute to society, that still contribute to the team. So how does this work? Do you only pay the student athletes that are on scholarship, or do you pay the others too, or do you pay them all? How does it work? There's just too many gray areas for this situation, and that's why the present status is that we're not paying student athletes.
I'm making the argument for why we should pay student athletes. The NCAA really sticks to this term amateurism, which they do this to maintain academics as the main focus, hence student first and then athlete. There are numerous limitations to this title. Student athletes aren't allowed to, of course, get paid other than their scholarship, quote unquote paid. They aren't allowed to interact with professional teams and or agents. They aren't considered employees because they're considered students first. So the NCAA is arguably the only authority on a college campus that dictates their compensation and their hours worked. And a lot of exclusions apply to that also. So they aren't covered by national labor laws. They don't get workers' compensation. They aren't able to negotiate their amount of scholarship they're able to receive. And one of the cases I want to talk about today is Kent Walrup. He was a running back for Texas Christian University and ended up getting injured in a game in 1974 against Alabama, where he became paralyzed, so he wasn't able to play anymore and stuff like that. So that's disappointing, but he decided to sue for workers' compensation, ended up losing the case in 2000 because the court decided since he was a student first and not an employee, he wasn't covered under any labor laws and didn't get workers' compensation, and he didn't pay taxes on his financial aid, which is really sad to see. Also, as Hallie talked about, student athletes are heavily dedicated and committed to their sport. So I talked to Hallie herself about what it was like to be a student athlete here at Arizona State, playing indoor volleyball and beach volleyball. So she told me that they're legally required to only participate in 20 hours per week in their sport. That doesn't include travel or game time or anything like that. But during the season, she spent at least 30 hours a week doing extra practices, watching film maybe, and or spending a lot of time recovering from all the tough practices she had. And also during the off season, she actually spent more time. The 20 hours still were the legal requirement, but she spent more to 35 to 40 hours participating in captain practices and a lot of volunteering community service events held by the team. And they also spend a lot of time away from the classroom because they have to travel to away games. She said per semester she usually missed 4 classes per semester, which adds up to be a lot. They weren't allowed to have classes on Friday, so they have a really strict schedule and a very difficult time managing their time alone between athletics, their personal life, and getting all their academics done. And continuously, the NCAA makes a lot of money on intercollegiate athletics. So in 2017, they made $1.1 billion. Most of that came from TV deals. So for the men's basketball March Madness tournament, the NCAA sold the rights to that to CBS for a 14-year deal worth $8.8 billion. And then they sold the TV rights to the college football playoffs to ESPN for a 12-year deal for $5.64 billion. And some of the coaches in the NCAA D1 are the highest paid employees in the state. Nick Saban is the highest paid football coach at Alabama, where he makes $11.1 million a year. Men's basketball, Mike Krzyzewski, who is the men's head basketball coach at Duke, makes $8.9 million a year. And then women's basketball, Gio Auriemma, makes $2.4 million a year, and he coaches at University of Connecticut. So you're probably thinking, Tyler, these are all really good solid points, but what is the plan? Who actually has a plan for how to pay student athletes? So Joe Nocera is a writer, sports writer for the New York Times, and he came up with this 5-element plan in a way to pay college athletes. He worked with talked to a lot of economists and also collegiate athletic departments. So the first step is making intercollegiate athletics a free market, where universities offer contracts to students, and essentially students pick the best contract for them based on the money they're going to receive, along with the benefits of the university and stuff like that. Further, there would be salary caps for each team. So within each sport, they would have their own salary cap for the whole Division I. So football would have their own, men's basketball would have their own, women's basketball, women's volleyball would all have their own salary caps. In addition, student athletes would receive
2-year extensions after their 4 years of eligibility, so they're able to either finish their bachelor's degree or spend that 2 years getting a postgraduate degree also. There would be a lifetime health insurance, which I'm sure Kent would appreciate a lot during his time. And then also there would be a creation of a players union, so they're able to negotiate their contracts and their salaries, and also negotiate, a lot of different things like labor laws, such as workers' compensation, time off, and things like that. So we're going to take a look at some opinions from current student athletes here at Arizona State and see what their thoughts are on this topic.
I think that loot check should be higher based on how much money your sport generates. So I think if they're making a lot of money off of you as a player, that you should be compensated accordingly.
We should be paid.
I personally think that we get all our school paid for if we're on scholarships, so that's pretty awesome, but I think loot checks should be a little bit higher, and that we should get paid more, because we get a lot of fans, and we compete for the school, so I think we should get paid.
Shelby, any thoughts?
I agree.
Final thoughts?
She agrees. Go Devils!
Okay, so the future trend and in conclusion of our presentation here is that we are still not paying student athletes, and I don't see the NCAA directing that way for a very long time or ever. The NCAA has a stronghold for maintaining the whole idea of the academic focus, so they really want to push this idea that education is money. But as you saw on the slide before, we did talk to and we did interview a few student athletes, and they were all on board for paying student athletes. Of course they were. Who doesn't want money? Who doesn't want free cash or whatever the case is? But we heard the opinions from the ASU student athletes. They basically touched on the idea that they are giving so much of their time and their energy to the institution that why wouldn't they be rewarded for this behavior? But basically, it's our role and it's the NCAA's role to push this initiative and push this idea to the student athletes that education is money. That's the biggest thing that we as higher educators have to push to these athletic departments, the purpose and the key role of higher education and how that can be a huge benefit in a student athlete's life.
Thank you for watching our presentation. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a lot about student athletics.
And Dr. Dippold, now we want to propose the question to you whether you would pay student athletes or not.